Joining me on the program now, Partnerships Manager from Vision West, Brook Turner. Brook, kia ora, thanks for your time today.
Thanks for being here, Andrew. Great.
Hey, the note that you sent me was talking about something called SNGs, and honestly, I was scratching my head on this one. I thought, SNGs, I wonder what this is. I mean, I know this is the industry you work in, so this all slips off the tongue. I'm thinking the G has to be God, right? Because you're a Christian organisation. But decode it for us, Brooke. What's an SNG?
An SNG, actually, in this context, Andrew, is called a special needs grant.
Oh, okay,
And
yeah.
basically, in our welfare system, anyone who's unemployed, from job seekers, those on the sickness benefit, even those on the pension, anyone who's getting some sort of payment from government can go into MSD when they're at ends meet. When they're at sort of that sort of end of the line
Yeah.
and say, I have no food, I can't afford these bills, I've got nowhere to stay, and they'd be granted an SNG. So there's been special needs grants for food, special needs grants for emergency accommodation.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, what's happened in this latest series of like welfare reforms is that effectively there's just a conversation to say, let's stop giving as many of those out.
Yeah.
Let's tighten the criteria. Let's make it, overwhelmingly hard. So if you're where you were couch surfing before and you might go from home to home to home, and you went in for an SNG 18 months, 2 years ago, you would get that grant. You'd be able to go into a motel.
Yep.
You'd be connected to a social agency and hopefully be in some kind of transitional housing within a few weeks. Now it's like continue to couch surf.
Yeah.
And the same going for food. So what we're seeing is that with rising unemployment, and it's not just unemployment that's putting pressure on our welfare system. We've seen 46,000 more people be unemployed in the last 12 months.
Yep.
But we've also got this problem of underemployment. And I was just at church the other Sunday and talking to one of my friends, and they were saying, their administrators, I've got 2 administrators, but because business is not booming at all, they had to think about who they would let go.
Yep.
Because there's not enough work coming in, right? But they actually went from that Christian spirit and said, hey, I can either let one of you go, or
Yep.
you could both have a part-time role here.
Mm-hmm.
And their employees chose part-time, which is quite incredible.
Wow.
In that sort of generosity of spirit. But that's underemployment, right?
Yeah.
So that's sort of what's going on.
And we hear stories, and I'm sure you hear them as well, of people, couples where both are working, perhaps both working part-time jobs to juggle family responsibilities, but even employed people finding it difficult to make ends meet. The thing that really, I suppose, is concerning in this space is at the same time that the needs are going up, the policies to meet those needs are going down. There's more pressure than ever on the system, but it's more difficult to get the hope that you need. It seems to be going in the opposite direction of a generous response to a crisis.
That's right. And I mean, the latest homelessness insights report out from the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development shows that, there's been an increase of declines of special needs grants for housing from 5% of applicants to 30%, in the midst of a time that, we're seeing on our news each day in different parts of the country where there's a rising visibility of homelessness, right? More people sleeping in cars, more people on our city streets, more people struggling, and city councils are calling out to government for support. And I think, Andrew, there's a real question there about how do we respond in tough times? How do we do that as individuals? I know for me, I think about my faith and the faith of my family, and it's actually in those toughest times, that's when your faith shines the brightest, right? That's what tests it. Like, how am I going to behave to my neighbor who is in need? How am I going to behave when my family hits hardship or a next of kin hits hardship? But what is that question to the nation?
Wow. Yeah.
How should our nation be behaving in that?
Because there is an instinct when times are tough to hunker down and say, well, hey, I can't be as generous to charities anymore because I'm finding it difficult to make ends meet, and I just need to look after me and my crew, as it were. That, I suppose, is a normal human instinct. But there's something about the Christian faith which does push in the opposite direction of that. Yes, to look after our own families, but when times are tough, we pray more. When times are tough, we seek God more. We lean in to those important relationships, and it changes our focus, it changes our priorities, or at least it should.
That's right. And, I think a thing that we need to think really seriously about is, are we consumers or citizens, or are we
Mm,
consumers or contributors? So much is thrown at us every day in the name of need. You
yeah,
need these subscriptions to these streaming services. You need to go to these certain places to buy these certain items. You need new clothes. You need a new car. You need. And it's marketed to us as without this, you don't have a meaningful life.
yeah,
Now, as Christians, we say, actually, our meaningful life comes from above,
yeah.
not all this stuff. And so, therefore, I do think that there's an onus on Christians at times like these to go, which of those things that the world says is important do I need to forego in order to maintain a generosity of spirit to the things that God says is important.
Mm,
And we know, from verses like Isaiah 58 and Luke 4 that, the poor, those who are going without, the destitute, the homeless, the stranger, that when we reach out and we give to people like those, that's a real witness. And look, there's tremendous stories of witness happening right across the country. I'm not saying this because faith communities aren't doing that.
yeah.
Quite the contrary.
Mm,
We are doing that. And let's have a voice in this time to do more of that.
mm.
And let's have a voice to our local MPs, to our local councils, to the government at large to say, hey, let's look after everyone as times get tough.
And I know when people go for an SNG, look at me using it in a sentence now. I'm thoroughly on board with this, Brook. But when people
Well done.
apply for an SNG, there will be questions asked about, okay, what are you doing with your income? Let's take a look at your bank accounts. Can we support with budget advice? Are you perhaps spending money you don't need to spend? These sorts of tough questions are being asked when somebody's applying for an SNG, but maybe we should be asking those questions of ourselves as well. Asking those tough questions about where are we spending our money, how are we loving our neighbour in our community. That should be the way in which we respond to the crisis we're facing and to the crisis that others are facing.
That's right. And, we always have that terminology about sort of this mystical shadow figure, that we can't quite make out who they are. They're this anonymous other
Yeah.
who's ripping off the system.
Mm,
But if I told you right now that between the year 2000 and 2020, that poverty amongst older people grew in this country faster than any other OECD country.
wow.
That's a huge thing. If I told you today that superannuation at $522 a week after tax for a single person doesn't even cover the rental of a 1 or 2 bedroom property in Auckland, and you think of the nana down the road who's a widow who's trying to live on their own on
Yeah.
a single pension, that becomes real. Hey, it's Mary down the street, or it's Aunt Ju round the corner. No, we need to fight for her. So
Yeah.
my encouragement to the audience is to think about someone who's in hardship
Hmm.
and the support that you think they deserve, and then project that out to the wider populace. In most cases, people that we see come to get support from Vision West,
Yep.
they are bending over backwards. Honestly, I learned budgeted advice from them.
Mm.
They're doing such incredible things to make their dollars go further. We learn from that. Now, that's not always the case, but
Yeah.
overwhelmingly it is.
Mm.
So that's what I'd say to sort of that objection.
Wonderful challenge there to push beyond the stereotypes. Let's put a name, let's put a face to the hardship that's happening in our communities, and also prayerfully consider what our response would be. Brook, thank you so much for the work that you do at Vision West and for the wisdom and challenge that you share as well. Visionwest.org.nz, of course, for more information about that work. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.